I am NetMoverSitan. Welcome to my Lobotomy Corporation lore series. I decided to get this started while I was working on Frostpunk, a management game with a similar atmosphere. I noticed that there wasn't any lore videos on what was in this game, so I decided to make one myself. I must warn you in advance, there are a few spoilers in this video, and in the ones that will follow this. I've also had to take into account the spelling and grammar errors within the text as, one, this was made by a South Korean developer, and two, they were likely using a US English text setting. Now that we've got that cleared up, let's make a start on the introduction to the world of Lobotomy Corporation. Face the fear, build the future. The motto that sums that company up. Fear of that which is frighteningly alien in nature. And the future that is to be built? That which is inevitable, but undecided. It can be given into, or shaped with purpose. Just to get this clear, this is a basic overview of the world of Lobotomy Corporation, what is done within it. More specific lore topics will be covered in separate videos. And believe me, there's some spicy topics. Oh yes, and by the time this is uploaded, the sequel will be out. I won't be mentioning too much about that. And all that's covered here will be based on the lore within the Lobotomy Corporation, and a little speculation here and there. I have had to redo this due to some complaints about the audio and background music imbalance. Well, now that I have that cleared up, let's get started. Basically, you're a manager known as X in one of the Lobotomy Corporation's facilities, specifically one that specializes in power generation. You know, the kind of thing that society can't really do without. As in, what's making watching this video possible, or even me compiling it in the first place. In the world that the Lobotomy Corporation is set, the power-generating methods that we would be familiar with, such as coal, gas, oil, wind, solar, wave, bio, nuclear, they are just good enough to supply the needs of the population. You might be wondering, what could generate more power than nuclear fuel, or anything real or theoretical? The answer is abnormalities. Those that can't die, but generate power through some more arcane means, based on how the game works with working with them. As for those who work on them, a variety of agents. Those that risk their lives to generate the power quota. As for the clerks, that's more problematic, as he has no influence over them, as they're outside of his authority. Yeah, I think we can see the problem with that, can't we? And that's the least of this world's problems. And don't worry, I'll be getting to that as well. At least it's environmentally friendly. Anyway, let's talk about the world of Lobotomy Corporation, specifically the city. The city is located above the facility being underground. It's likely located somewhere in Korea and somewhere on the coast, based on the beach that can be seen in some cutscenes. As for the history of that city, there was a war in the past, although it's unlikely that it was nuclear due to two factors. One, ground troops were used, and two, they had perception filters, most likely to protect their mental health. More on that later. But if there was no ground troops, there'd be no need to use that to minimize the risk of developing PTSD. After that war, they rebuilt society. It's unknown what the rest of the world is like, although it's likely it's either similar or worse. What's outside this city, and possibly other cities, is a devastated wasteland, although not necessarily a nuclear wasteland like in Judge Dredd. As for the city, it's like with many capital cities in reality. The farther away you go from the centre of government and business, the worse it gets. Although the nicer parts of the city aren't entirely safe either, not if you catch the wrong kind of attention. For those thinking that this is a world with clear definitions of morality, you are entirely wrong. From what a variety of in-game sources can tell me, this is quite a grimdark world, where it's not as simple as black and white. In the nicer parts of the city, there's some intrigue for those that off the wrong people, but in the nastier outskirts, there's the threat of running into the sweepers, which will not be open to diplomacy, and fixers. They're basically hired guns, not always literal guns, as the roles can vary depending on their skills. Although they can be on the payroll of the wings of the world, which we'll get to a little later. But for now, let's go over the city itself. I need to be more specific about that. Let's move on to the nicer parts of the city. The Nest. That's where those with enough wealth and power can afford to live, such as the corporations that run it. Along with those high enough on the corporate ladder, the atmosphere appears to be one of conformity, at least around the Nest, where expressing sadness, that's discouraged and considered selfish. Also, based on the fact that there are businesses and financial considerations, it's implied that it's not the North that took over the South. Either that or the North decided to take the same have our cake and eat it too attitude that China has in our world. Well, it's not a possibility that I can entirely rule out. The back streets are the nastier parts of the city, where the rest, fortunate enough to live within it, live. Although some of them can barely meet basic needs there, never mind improve their lots. This is where many employees are recruited into Lobotomy Corporation came from. for reasons that will be covered in this lore video. This part of the city seems to be largely left in the hands of organized crime syndicates, as there's no mention of the same social pressures that exist in the Nest. The Outskirts are the area immediately outside the city itself, where those that the city wouldn't take in are left to die. Although they try to get into the city, there's likely a physical barrier, probably a wall, guarded by other human or automated security designed to prevent access. A leftover from the war, most likely. And there's the risk of starvation, disease, or being killed and eaten by cleaners. The ruins are either beyond the outskirts or within it. Sometimes objects containing vast power can be found within them. So far, so bad, eh? Right. What are the Wings of the World? They appear to be the major players in at least this city, if not beyond it. They run things within it. But if they do something that certain individuals, specifically from the head, consider a threat, they're those that might have someone take care of the problem. That is, if the problem doesn't destroy itself first. Only those that really excel can call themselves Wings of the World, Lobotomy Corporation being one of them, although not without a huge price to some of those within it. There are at most 26 Wings of the World, as that's how many singularities there are. Smaller companies either went out of business or were bought out by larger companies. Singularities are technologies that was considered needed in the world, such as the production of a permanent food supply. Problem solved, Reverend Thomas Malthus. The manufacturing of customized living creatures. Wait, genetic editing? Me. Can you imagine what they could make with that? They could make real Pokemon. I mean, electronic-based toned-down animal cruelty is troubling enough, never mind making it real. Right, what's next? Oh yes, they have cargo transport at speeds that make it seem like teleportation. That would be interesting. Faster than any form of transport currently known to us. AI that was realer than people? That definitely sounds like Angela. Technology to preserve the present by binding time? This is likely to be Time Track, that which allows the limited control over the flow of time within the facility. It might also explain a number of things. They also have medical nanotech. That's likely to be there as well. Brought to you by K Corporation. Along with actual teleportation, brought to you by W Corporation. Although, it's likely only effective at a comparatively short range. As in short compared to the cargo transports at speeds that make it seem like teleportation. I'm guessing that the Lobotomy Corporation's capability to create energy from inflicting physical and psychological pain to humans was another. In that case, they have two singularities, at most. Well, if they wanted to cause me pain to generate power, They should just force me to watch Mamma Mia. I would say the first version of the Sonic the Hedgehog movie trailer, but that'd be too short to have any effect that would provide a decent amount of power. Yeah, they think big. Right. Another company that was mentioned was Company R, but we won't cover that yet. I'll save that for the Mercenaries lore video. Let's move on to the head. They are the de facto government of this city. If you believe that democracy survived in this world, you clearly haven't been paying attention. This is a world that is well and truly It doesn't follow the morality of our world. The only example that I can think of that would be even more extreme than this is The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, where the natural order developed over 800,000 years was spawned from the fever nightmare of eugenicists. Yeah, Francis Galton, you had a lot to answer for. Anyway, part of why the head exists is to keep the wings in check. If any of them step out of line, or at least do something that they consider a threat, implying that they're at least slightly paranoid, they'll send an arbiter and perhaps claws to take care of the problem. If the arbiter is the precision tool, as they're usually more discreet, although that doesn't mean that they won't attack directly, the claws are the blunt instruments. They have a combination of cybernetic and chemical enhancements to make them perfect killing machines. One that isn't easily killed. Well, could have fooled me, considering that they look like some twisted combination of Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, and RoboCop. Actually, come to think of it, it's not that much different from how things are now in our world, except they're more honest with themselves and are allowed to fully express that side of them. Yeah, I know. The eye? What is that? Well, those thinking Orwellian nightmare are probably not off by much. Their purpose is to keep track of everything. Certainly the wings of the world, as they have a lot of power. Power that might be used against the head. Something that they might want to avoid. They do so through tuners and gazers. Likely to be a variety of visual and audio surveillance, along with possible online monitoring. Although even that isn't enough to know everything about the different companies, so other measures would become necessary. The back streets have an organized crime problem in the form of syndicates, which, based on the fact that they're still around, and there's no mention of them being taken care of, it would appear that, to the authorities, that as long as they keep their activities within the back streets and don't go too far with their activities, they couldn't care less, as it's not their problem. Yeah, as far as authoritarian regimes go, this one would rather not do more than it has to. And not just because of the financial side of it. Well, why do anything where you can get others to do it for you? At a fraction of the cost, if any cost at all. Yeah. As for mercenaries, well, There are some willing to work for whoever is willing to pay them enough. Heath Ledger's Joker had a point in The Dark Knight. If you're good at something, never do it for free. These take the form of low-level, hired guns like fixers, although they, and others, can also take more interesting forms. I won't be covering this in detail here, as this is more of a general overview of how the world of Lobotomy Corporation works. As for the facility itself, well, the facility that you end up working in is one that generates power from working with abnormalities, some of them potentially lethal to those ill-equipped to deal with them. The power is generated from the pain and suffering, physical and mental, of those agents that work on them. The questions you might be asking are, what are agents? What are abnormalities? Well, I'll need to cover them here before I start the abnormality lore videos. It was founded by 3 people: the enigmatic A, the experienced Benjamin, and the inspiring Carmen. Each of them died by different methods, but at the time X starts as manager, the facility is maintained by Angela, the most advanced AI ever created, and is one of 2 reasons why Lobotomy Corporation is one of the wings of the world. Under her are Sephirahs, lesser AIs that manage the different departments. I'll be sure to cover them all in their own lore videos. Lobotomy Corporation became great after repeated failures and difficulties. Speaking of which, agents are the foot soldiers, the red shirts that X commands to work on the abnormalities. They risk their lives, and often their sanity, to meet the energy quota. They must be pretty special to work for one of the wings of the world, right? No, they aren't. Because you see, the hiring standards of the Lobotomy Corporation are surprisingly relaxed. No, that's not the right way to put this. Deceptively relaxed is more accurate. You don't need a good education, you don't need to have any skills, you don't need to be wealthy, you don't need any experience, you don't even need to have a well-adjusted personality. All you need to have is the ability to feel pain and feel emotion. It sounds like a great employer, willing to give people a chance to work for them. Not elitist at all, right? There's a reason for that. There's a reason for why the recruitment policy is so lax. The death toll is high enough to require that they aren't selective about who they hire. And also, some abnormalities generate more power when employees die, and in one case, need someone to die in order to generate power. There's also a lot of those willing to join, so they aren't going to run out of recruits anytime soon. There is a risk that they could die from physical injuries or go insane due to mental corruption reaching 100%. This is remedied due to a drug known as encapheleptin, a drug pacifying the ones taking it, with a risk of addiction. There is perception filter technology, but that's mostly for the manager to stop him from going insane. A technology that was used by the military during the war, which eventually trickled down to civilian use. This technology made blood-stained corpses look like dolls with red paint on them. I wouldn't be surprised if this was adapted into visors for the guards at the walls, preventing those in the outskirts from entering the city, and thugs working for the syndicates in the back alleys. With the guards, it'd be like Team Fortress 2, full of chaos and cartoonish violence, where they gun down anything that gets too close, laughing with glee as they gun down the hordes of enemies, which in reality are people trying to break into the city. While for the thugs, it'd be more like a first-person Smash Bros. Can you imagine that? From the thugs' perspective, they're seeing a certain popular Italian-American stereotype, and they were ordered to beat the out of him as a certain tie-wearing gorilla. But from the victim's perspective, they see a couple of thugs gleefully beating them up with childlike joy, as they aren't seeing the true scale of the violence they're inflicted. It puts that VR training scene in Johnny English Strikes Again into perspective, doesn't it? Don't know what I mean? Please look it up. The strain of their duties eventually breaks them, and they die. Either due to injuries, going insane, or fulfilling a more specific condition. Although, as far as management is concerned, certainly one of them within management, if it came to a choice between harvesting energy or saving the employee would die with no second thoughts. It even gets so bad that employees accept that they're going to die at some point. It's not a matter of if, but when. Pinhead would have work here for years if Le Machin's box, or the Lament configuration as it's otherwise known as, was an abnormality. He'd be delivering pleasures quicker than you can say, hurt me plenty. And I'm sensing that some of you have been creeped out by that. Well, I seem to have given you the idea of how this works. Let's move on, shall we? The stats of each agent is split up into 4 categories: Fortitude, Prudence, Temperance, and Justice. These are the 4 cardinal virtues, the virtues required for a virtuous life, something which predated Christianity, existing around the time of Plato. Fortitude, to confront fear of death. Quite fitting for where they are. The higher this is, the more of a physical beating that they can take, due to them having more HP. It's also associated with red damage, that which purely attacks HP. Prudence, to discern the appropriate course of action. That's certainly useful in the facility. The higher this is, the more of a psychological beating this agent can take, due to having more SP. It's also associated with white damage, which purely attacks SP. Although when used on a panicking employee, this can knock some sense into them and restore their sanity. Temperance, to be sound-minded and show discretion. The higher this is, the higher the success rate of a work, and the faster they work. It's also associated with black damage, which attacks both HP and SP. This could be used to restore an employee's sanity, but at the risk of their HP. Yeah, I don't think that's recommended. Justice, to be righteous and fair. The higher this is, the faster they attack, and the faster they move. This is associated with pale damage, which attacks the soul. That attacks HP according to a percentage of the maximum HP. Weapons with this damage type, and suits that resist it, are about as rare as a video game movie adaptation made by Hollywood that they don't up. Abnormalities are part of what generates power for the facility, the other part being the agents working on them. Abnormalities were always around, but had only recently been noticed. They were discovered, and their potential was researched. They can't be killed, as previously mentioned, but they can be incapacitated. Abnormalities are not all bizarre alien creatures that need to be isolated, nor are they all evil monsters from old fairy tales, nor are they supernatural gods that will judge our sins. They are said to stem from a river that has been flowing at the bottom of the world for many ages, the source of everything, but has been forgotten by humans. Yeah. Strange, isn't it? There is a very small gap, or hole, through which the river is connected, where often strange creatures come out of this gap. There are 3 abnormalities that are examples of this. This gap is in the Black Forest. Others appear to either come from outer space or from parallel worlds, possibly from similar tears in reality, or objects infused with this power. Clearly there are some parts of the world where the walls of reality are thinner than in other parts, that allowed these abnormalities from other planes of reality and even parallel worlds to cross over. More of them were needed to supply the power needed. So Lobotomy Corporation developed technology that made abnormalities. Incomplete forms that came from the forgotten place. This created terror that resulted in them being sealed underground. I shudder to think what the test subjects were offered to participate in these experiments. I wouldn't be surprised if they looked for people in the outskirts, people that no one that mattered would miss, and lured them in with promises of food, shelter, and the chance of a better life than they currently had. Yeah, that sounds about right. And there's certainly plenty of those in the outskirts. There are those that would follow any that promise something better, no matter how questionable their morality. By the time they realize what a colossal mistake they made, it'd be too late for them to change their minds. Although there are some who weren't desperate, who volunteered for this, possibly not knowing what they were getting into, and even unintentionally drawing in their families. I've said too much for now. I'll be covering the rest of that story eventually. Don't worry. Right. Ego means extermination of geometrical organ. These are powerful weapons, but they can be broken. There are also no rules towards stopping even Sephirahs from using them. With one exception. They also come in the form of suits that can provide varied protection, which might also weaken those that wear them against certain damage types. This depends on which suit is worn, of course. They also come in the form of gifts that provide specific effects on the one that has them. Not all of them are entirely beneficial. Used correctly, they can give the wielder the ability to stand against abnormalities on a more level playing field. Although most employees have no knowledge of combat outside of basic training, and so it won't be as effective. Well, it's not a requirement of being employed by Lobotomy Corporation. Think of it as like playing an action-adventure game, such as the kind involving a house-breaking delinquent hero who likes nothing better than to smash pots and steal from other people's houses. Has that in green or blue or red or whatever colour he's wearing, has that pointy-eared turd got nothing better to do than to commit petty criminal acts? Anyway, this character is skilled in the art of combat, but all you need to do is push some buttons at the correct times or move the directional inputs in specific ways. That's basically how these work for the wielder of egos. This is because its power grows according to the wielder's heart. Learning how to use it wasn't needed, because the moment it was touched, they just knew how to use it. The power wasn't the wielder's own. It was borrowed, imitated. Much like a certain item from a certain DC movie featuring a certain Canadian that didn't do too well. Although there was one working for Lobotomy Corporation who could draw out its true potential. Most others barely stand a chance against abnormalities with them. Right. The Sephirahs are the cerebellums to Angela's cerebrum. These are the heads of each of the departments of Lobotomy Corporation. Various high-level employees in each department having its own function, and also consequences for them being disrupted. And not just if the clerks are all killed, as they're needed to maintain a department's function. As for the Sephirahs themselves, they might look human, but, well, what's important to know right now is this. The late Douglas Adams put it best in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series. He was speaking about the role of president, but the same principle applies to those suitable for being a Sephirah, where anyone who is capable of running their departments with any degree of proficiency shouldn't be allowed to do so. I'll save why each is unsuitable for running each of their departments for the layer lore videos, and as for why looks can be deceiving with them, I'll save that for the middle layer lore video. Don't worry, I've got it planned out. So I'm not going to just make this up as I go along. Well, I think I've covered the basics of Lobotomy Corporation. Anything that I haven't covered, I'm either saving for other lore videos or I've missed something. Please put it in the comments or contact me, if I have. Until next time. Hail the rabbits!